Dragonlance is one of the most popular settings for Dungeons & Dragons, and like most things in tabletop gaming, there's a lot of history behind the scenes that shaped the product over the years. Even very minor decisions had huge impact as the line progressed, and we're going to look at some of them. Oh, and if you're wondering about the video game footage, that's the Chronicles of Mystara, which obviously is not Dragonlance, but the only Dragonlance video games are the old Gold Box games, and I was not about to play those just for incidental footage. Originally, Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weis weren't even supposed to write the iconic novels. The fact that there even were novels was an afterthought, a tie-in product for the new DL series of modules. TSR fiction editor Gene Black hired an author to churn out a book based on the DL1 Dragons of Despair module, and it wasn't quite working out. To quote Margaret Weis, "Ugh, he was terrible." So Hickman and Weis got together one weekend and wrote out the first 5 chapters of Dragons of Autumn Twilight. Black was impressed and immediately fired the other writer before allowing Hickman and Weis to take over. There were issues, of course. To start, TSR had to deal with Random House to publish their fiction line, and Random House was sure that the Dragonlance novel would not sell. In order to reduce costs, TSR mandated that it be printed at a cover price of $2.99, meaning that there was a firm page count limit. According to Margaret Weis, a manuscript exists for Dragons of Autumn Twilight that's 3 times longer than what was published and has never seen the light of day. When asked if she would ever publish it, Weis said to talk to Wizards of the Coast. During writing, TSR Legal stuck their nose in. Apparently, the trademark filed for the word Dragonlance was as an adjective, meaning that anytime the titular weapon was mentioned in the books, they demanded that it be written as Dragonlance, Dragonlance. Apparently only took one phone call to the editor saying, "Seriously?" to end that nonsense. Speaking of iconic names, the halfling race of fearless kleptomaniacs was originally spelled Kinder. However, people kept pronouncing it kinder, so the spelling was changed to Kender to be more obvious. Meanwhile, over in Forgotten Realms, we still have this. And Tasselhoff Burfoot, named after the actor who was then famous for Knight Rider, David Hasselhoff. I haven't found a source to confirm who made the decision, but apparently both Tracy and Laura Hickman, as well as Margaret Weis, were all fans of the show. I did find an image of David Tasselhoff in nipple tassels so I could make a "don't tassel the Hoff" joke here, but I decided not to inflict that on you after the amount of booze it took to erase it from my memory. Most people know that Raistlin's raspy voice came from an early playtest session of the DL1 module with player Terry Phelps, but did you know that one other seemingly small decision for Raistlin caused many of the well-known elements not only of the trilogy, but of the setting itself? Artist Larry Elmore painted the heroes of the Lance and decided to give Raistlin golden skin and hourglass-shaped eyes. Interestingly, Elmore wasn't pleased with this art because he felt it was rushed, only able to grab whoever happened to be in the TSR offices for a photo reference and given only a couple of days to finish the painting. But he delivered now what is one of the most recognizable pieces of art for the setting, if not for Dungeons & Dragons entirely. When Margaret Weis asked the reason why Raistlin looked so different from his twin brother, she was told it was because Elmore thought it looked cool, which left her and Hickman having to explain it. Weis was given the task and decided that it must have come from some sort of test of power, one in which he risked death, but that ultimately scarred him. It led to the Towers of High Sorcery and the Test of High Sorcery, along with Raistlin's vision of all things decaying, which then led to the 3 robes indicating alignment. It also cemented the characters of Caramon and Raistlin, the latter of which was willing to sacrifice everything for power, and the former the protective brother, complete with their codependent relationship. All of this and more snowballed into large parts of the Dragonlance world, all because Elmore thought hourglass eyes and gold skin looked cool. So remember how I said Random House didn't think Dragons of Autumn Twilight would sell? It sold. millions of copies and made the New York Times bestseller list, and even 35 years after release, still ranks highly on Amazon's sales charts. Needless to say, TSR had a hit on their hands and just had to figure out what to do with it. Originally, promotion was left pretty much to Weiss and Hickman to sort out. One such event was a Reader's Theater at Gen Con in 1984, performed by a volunteer cast. Margaret Weiss's daughter even went out on a sandwich board handing out free tickets. Both nights were a smash hit, and the packed crowds loved it. As the trilogy progressed, TSR and Random House put more resources into promoting the novels. In contrast to the unceremoniously dumping of the first novel onto the market, the second book, Dragons of Winter Night, was given a huge launch at Gen Con in 1985. The book was available for sale on the first day of the convention, with a panel dedicated to Dragonlance with many of the creators on the second day of the convention. The panel started in the morning and opened up to a Q&A. The first person stepped up to ask a question.
Why did you guys kill Sturm?
Apparently, the young man stayed up all night reading the just-released book and, either inadvertently or intentionally, spoiled the ending for the entire room full of eager fans. So the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition Dragonlance box set had a map that, well, let's just be blunt, it's all kinds of f***ed up. The version that went to printers was incomplete. The most obvious is the dozens of white dots that were originally meant to have symbols in them based on the legend in the corner. Not only that, but many of the names on the map were temporary, unless there's supposed to be a Great Wall of China in Krynn. In the 1990s, TSR signed a licensing deal for film rights for Dungeons & Dragons with Courtney Solomon and his production company Sweet Pea Entertainment. That is going to be a video of its own. Or 2 or 3 or 5. There's a lot there. But the deal did impact Dragonlance significantly, as the license with TSR was for all Dungeons & Dragons material, which would include the settings and their associated novels, including Dragonlance, which some executives at TSR realized was probably not in their best interest, considering the attention Dragonlance got from more mainstream audiences who had never picked up a 20-sided die. So what could they do to protect the property from this movie deal? If they can't take the Dragonlance out of the deal that was already signed, maybe they could take it out of Dungeons & Dragons itself. The line was still a big seller, so they couldn't just take it out of print, but William Connors had a new system called the Saga system. Maybe they could put the two together, and that is how we got Dragonlance The Fifth Age, which was not well received by fans for multiple reasons. The setting radically changed to accommodate the new rule system, and that rule system wasn't really built for the sort of epic fantasy stories that make up Dragonlance. The system itself was although rather rough around the edges because TSR CEO Lorraine Williams reportedly had a ban on playtesting while on the clock. Because heaven forbid a game company test their games to make sure the rules work. That's just a frivolous waste of time and stealing money from the company. Anyway, the Saga system was ahead of its time and introduced a lot of design elements we see today in more narrative-driven games. Unfortunately, it never really got the chance to shine on its own, as TSR was acquired by Wizards of the Coast. Saga was still supported for a little while after the acquisition, but Wizards had other ideas for what to do with Dragonlance. Saga's legacy still lives on, though, in one class. The innate spellcasting abilities of the magic system in Saga inspired a new class for Dungeons & Dragons 3rd Edition, the Sorcerer. But more about 3rd Edition and Dragonlance will have to wait, as before we leave the TSR era, I want to make a quick detour to Ravenloft. TSR want to do more cross-promotion of their various settings. One of those involved bringing Death Knight Lord Soth to Ravenloft. James Lauder, tasked with writing the novel introducing Lord Soth to the demiplane of dread, knew this wouldn't work out long-term, as Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss weren't happy about it. But the nature of work-for-hire contracts means that they really had no say in the matter, and TSR had made their decision. So after Soth had a few adventures around Ravenloft and running into Count Strahd, he ended up as Dark Lord of his own domain, Sithicus. Let's back up just a bit and explain Ravenloft. The Dark Powers rule this demiplane, where they tend to, for lack of better description, kind of suck up the most evil people in the multiverse in order to punish them. Each Dark Lord is given a domain that they rule, but also contains an ironic punishment. For example, the vampiric Count Strahd von Zarovich rules Barovia, but is cursed because he murdered his brother in jealousy over his wife, Tatiana. His curse is that the woman he loves will reincarnate, but always slip from his reach. The Lich, Azalin Rex, came from Greyhawk and is the lord of the domain Darkon. He devoted his life to pushing the bounds of magic through ruthless experimentation, and his curse was to never be able to learn another new spell or magic again. Lord Soth, the exacting military leader, was given Sithicus to torment his regimented mind by having an ever-shifting history and landscape he could never properly organize. But here's the thing. Ravenloft is a land of emos, constantly emoing about the place, whining and raging over their terrible fates. While Lord Soth is a hardcore old-school goth. Soth, given the leadership of Sithicus and realizing his punishment, locked himself in his castle and started to brood. And kept brooding. The Dark Powers sent imps and demons to torment him to remind him of his failures, and Soth just sat there going, yeah, I deserve it, and he brooded more. For 3 f***ing centuries.
Here I am, Lord Soth of the Black Rose, and they had me ruling a dark domain. Pardon me for breathing, which I never do anyway since I'm undead, so I don't know why I bother to say it. Oh, Taxus, I'm so depressed. Life, don't talk to me about life.
The Dark Powers realized they couldn't break this guy worse than he was already broken, so they just gave up and plopped him right back to Krynn the moment he left. And that is how Lord Soth of Dargard Keep, the Knight of the Black Rose, is the only person to ever beat Ravenloft without cheating. When Wizards of the Coast acquired TSR, they made an effort to wrap up projects that were already in production and continue development that had already started on Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition. They also wanted to make sure to reach out to fans and mend bridges that TSR had burnt. When it comes to Dragonlance, they wanted a new novel trilogy from the original creators, Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weis. But that's really all they wanted. They didn't really have plans for the Dragonlance game line. And it was one hell of a burnt bridge that needed repairing between Hickman and Weis and TSR. Weis agreed, but only if her company was allowed to create game material for D&D 3rd edition. And that's how Sovereign Press ended up with the license for Dragonlance. The core source book for Dragonlance 3rd edition was a bit difficult for the design team, many of which were recruited from online Dragonlance fan groups for posting homebrew content, as it had to take place in the 5th Age. No one really wanted that, but Wizards of the Coast insisted to promote the new novels, since they were the transition between the two eras. It was also given a rewrite by Wizards of the Coast staff, who changed several elements and rules to fit their branding. The final disappointment for the design team, the credits on the book listed Margaret Weis and her then-husband Don Perrin in large letters as they had name recognition and owned the company, while the designers who put in the most work, Jamie Chambers and Christopher Coyle, were listed in small letters underneath. But the most important thing was that Dragonlance survived and was now back in the hands of the fans. The license was originally for 3 years with Sovereign, and after that company was closed following Weis and Perrin's divorce, Margaret Weis's new company, Margaret Weis Productions, took over. As far as these licensed products go, the bestiary of Krynn is rather notorious. The book was plagued with small typos and editorial errors, the most infamous of which is the entry on the unicorn and its aura of clam. Also, the book felt less like a role-playing game product and more like a college textbook due to its layout. This was because the company was under time constraints and had another layout designer to handle this book and to take off some of the workload. This designer used a different program, one meant specifically for textbooks and other industrial products, and it caused massive headaches for the entire process and led to many issues in the editorial stage. When the first print run was nearly sold out and it was time to reprint it, they decided instead to just scrap the entire layout and start from scratch in InDesign, which was the new standard program by this point. Thus, only 2 years after the release of the Bestiary of Krynn, the Bestiary of Krynn Revised debuted and is widely considered a much better and better-looking product. There were many other books released for Dragonlance by Sovereign Press and Margaret Weis Productions, but the limits of the license specifically stated they could only publish game books, absolutely no fiction. So, how did they manage to publish books like sequels to the Leaves from the Inn of the Last Home that were obviously fiction anthologies? Well, they're not. They're lore source books, obviously. Also, by this time, Wizards of the Coast wasn't watching its licensees nearly as closely as they previously had, so they got away with a bit more than they probably should have. Why was Wizards of the Coast so distracted? Well, one reason could be the film license. No, not that one. The film license for Dragonlance. Yes, there was a Dragonlance film. I'm serious. In 2008, a direct-to-DVD animated feature came out called Dragonlance, Dragons of the Autumn Twilight. I could do an entire video just on this film, but I'll hold off on that for now and talk about two aspects. One is, the film has one of the weirdest animation styles I've ever seen. I mentioned the Battletech cartoon mixing traditional animation and 3D CGI renderings in my Battletech and the Unseen video, but in 1994, Saban managed to do a better job than the production company did almost a decade and a half later. I don't want to blame them that much because they were trying to do a lot on an incredibly low budget, but this film is almost unwatchable due to the animation quality. The 2D animation is stilted and flat, while the 3D CGI characters stand out like a sore thumb and are rather abysmal. Babylon 5 was doing better CGI in the mid-90s. That being said, while the film is basically unwatchable, it is eminently listenable, and I highly recommend it for the voice performances alone.
Is your brother coming?
I am already here. I see my appearance startles you. A small price to pay for the power I have achieved, I assure you.
He's been this way since the test at the Tower of High Sorcery.
They did not skimp out on the cast with names like Michael Rosenbaum as Tanis, Lucy Lawless as Goldmoon, Michelle Trachtenberg as Tika, Phil Lamar as Riverwind, and many other experienced voice actors. But even among this talented cast, the standout has to be Kiefer Sutherland as Raistlin. He put an absolutely stunning effort into the role, and it shows through. Not only did he read the books to get a better understanding of the character, he even researched the Dragonlance and Dungeons & Dragons lore to find out the verbal components for his spells to make sure he was pronouncing them correctly.
Kenneth Karan Tovan's car.
Dragonlance, Dragons of the Autumn Twilight is a terrible animated film, but it is a great audio drama. And just so you know, you won't find the words Dungeons and Dragons anywhere on this release. When Wizards of the Coast bought TSR and Hasbro bought Wizards of the Coast, they were able to renegotiate the license with Sweet Pea Entertainment. The new license deal came through a legal settlement and specified that Sweet Pea had the rights to use anything from Dungeons and Dragons, but not any of the campaign settings. However, this meant that Sweet Pea still had exclusive rights to the Dungeons & Dragons trademark in film and television. So, Wizards of the Coast could only license the name Dragonlance to the production company of the animated film. Which brings us to Dungeons & Dragons 4th Edition. There was never a version of Dragonlance released for 4th Edition, but we almost got a completely rebooted Dragonlance with a brand new novel trilogy by Jim Butcher. Yes, that Jim Butcher. At the time, the Dresden Files novels were first starting to take off, and Butcher's first hardback release, Codex Alera Volume 1, The Furies of Calderon, wasn't quite out yet. However, Butcher was already known to Wizards of the Coast as he was part of the closed playtest for D&D 4th Edition. When asked for his feedback, he gave them 2 words: New Coke. Yet when it came time to reboot Dragonlance, they still wanted him on board and spoke to him about his ideas. But why take my word for it? Here's what Butcher had to say. I was going to change things where Tasselhoff hadn't stolen Flint's knife at the beginning, or Flint caught Tasselhoff trying to steal his knife because Tass didn't make his pickpocketing roll. So a goblin was going to have wounded Tanis, and they were going to have to take an extra 15 minutes to bandage Tanis up before they rolled into town, and that would have changed the entire scope of the Dragonlance War. I wanted to start with that little incident and go from there. Is your mind blown yet? Well, if you've read Dragons of the Autumn Twilight, it would be at least, because that one small change would have had ripple effects that would affect the entire campaign setting in some very drastic ways. But that wasn't all. Butcher also had ideas on character. Terrence would be a thoughtful general action hero type, while Raistlin would be based on Dr. Gregory House from the television show House as the snarky deadpan know-it-all asshole. So what happened? 2 problems came up in the negotiations. First, they asked Butcher if the novels could be 4th edition compatible. Not gamebooks, novels, as in the stories. Because Wizards of the Coast wanted to cross-promote as much as possible, all fiction had to align with how the rules of the game operated, so characters would have at-will encounter and daily powers that they used in the actual narrative and be easily identifiable as such by readers. I'm not kidding. This is something that R.A. Salvatore has also complained about in Q&As when writing during this period. However, that was more of a confusion and a minor roadblock compared to the answer to one simple question. Are Tracy and Margaret okay with this? After getting a non-answer, Butcher gave a hard pass to the entire thing. Recreating someone else's intellectual property and rewriting their characters without permission was a deal breaker for him, regardless of who owned the legal rights. What Wizards of the Coast planned to do, or what other authors they looked to hire, if any, I can't say. There was also supposed to be a Ravenloft book for 4th edition, but that was cancelled when the line was revamped for the Essentials soft relaunch of 4th edition. The material from the unfinished Ravenloft book was rolled into the Shadowfell Gloomrot and Beyond, and other campaign settings, including Dragonlance, were cancelled. But is this the end of Dragonlance? I highly doubt it. Several characters from the setting were used in example text in the 5th edition core rulebooks, the Kinders were part of the playtest for 5th edition, and both Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss have expressed interest in returning to Krynn. And with Joe Manganiello shopping around his script for a Dragonlance film, odds are pretty good that we'll be back in Krynn sooner than you think.
This is my reality.